The difference rarely announces itself loudly. It settles in quietly, in the space between expectation and reality. For many Americans arriving in the UK, the shock is not found in accents or landmarks, but in the subtle reversal of familiar social rhythms. Streets feel older not just in stone, but in tempo. Conversations pause longer. Rules appear unwritten yet firmly observed. The environment gives the impression of continuity rather than reinvention, as if daily life has been unfolding along the same lines for centuries and sees no urgency to change course. Early impressions tend to focus on restraint. Public spaces feel composed, even during moments that would normally invite noise or display. Emotional volume is lower. Reactions are measured. Where American culture often rewards openness and immediacy, British public life appears to value control and understatement. Politeness operates less as warmth and more as structure, guiding interactions with precision rather than enthusiasm. This can initially read as distance, even coldness, though it functions more as a social buffer than a personal judgment. As days pass, deeper contrasts become visible. The UK's relationship with authority feels less confrontational but more quietly rigid. Systems are trusted, questioned indirectly, and navigated patiently. Bureaucracy does not apologize for existing. It assumes cooperation. Time itself feels treated differently. Punctuality matters, but urgency does not dominate. Progress happens incrementally, without the American emphasis on speed, optimization, or visible ambition. Success is downplayed. Confidence is often masked with self-deprecation. Social behavior reflects this mindset. Casual friendliness is not immediate courtesy. Connections unfold slowly, built through consistency rather than instant rapport. Humor replaces emotional disclosure, often dry, indirect, and layered. Complaints surface as irony. Praise arrives cautiously. This creates an environment where emotional signals are subtle and easy to misread for those accustomed to clarity and affirmation. Over time, these patterns begin shaping perception. Many Americans notice a gradual recalibration of expectations. Silence becomes less uncomfortable. Modesty stops feeling like absence. Stability gains value over momentum. The culture does not ask to be admired or understood quickly. It simply continues, measured and intact, inviting adjustment rather than accommodation. This adjustment often becomes most visible in everyday routines. Workplaces, for example, tend to operate with an unspoken hierarchy of restraint. Ambition exists, but it is expressed quietly and rarely celebrated openly. Initiative is appreciated, yet overt self-promotion can feel misplaced. Americans accustomed to clear praise, performance metrics, and motivational language frequently encounter a flatter emotional landscape where approval is implied rather than stated. Feedback arrives softened, wrapped in courtesy, and sometimes delayed, requiring careful interpretation. Social life follows similar patterns. Invitations are less spontaneous, more deliberate. Plans are made well in advance and rarely altered without reason. Informality exists, but it is structured, contained within familiar boundaries. Many Americans notice that friendliness does not automatically translate into closeness. Conversations may remain surface level for extended periods, with personal topics approached gradually, if at all. Trust is built through time, shared routines, and reliability rather than expressive openness. Public behavior reinforces this sense of containment. Cues are treated as moral agreements. Public transport operates under an unspoken code of quiet cooperation. Emotional outbursts draw attention not because they are forbidden, but because they disrupt a collective preference for composure. Even disagreement tends to be expressed through understatement, passive phrasing, or humor rather than direct confrontation. This can leave Americans unsure whether a boundary has been crossed or merely acknowledged. The built environment contributes to the psychological shift. Cities feel compressed, layered, and historically dense. Living spaces are smaller, streets narrower, and private life feels more inward-facing. There is less emphasis on expansion and more on adaptation. The presence of history is not curated for display. It is integrated into daily function. Buildings lean slightly, systems creak, and imperfections are tolerated as signs of continuity rather than flaws to be corrected gradually. These elements begin interacting. The slower pace, the muted emotional register, and the respect for established systems combine to create a cultural atmosphere that prioritizes endurance over disruption. For Americans raised in a context of reinvention and visibility, this can feel limiting at first, as if momentum has been replaced by maintenance. Yet within this restraint, a different form of stability reveals itself, one that values predictability, subtlety, and long-term coherence over immediate expression. With time, the emotional logic of the environment becomes clearer. What initially feels reserved begins to reveal its own form of care. Social distance functions less as exclusion and more as respect for personal boundaries. Privacy is treated as a shared value rather than a personal preference. The absence of constant affirmation allows space for neutrality, where individuals are not required to perform confidence or enthusiasm to be socially accepted. This can feel unsettling for Americans accustomed to affirmation as reassurance. Yet it gradually reshapes emotional expectations. Many Americans find that daily interactions start to feel lighter in a different way. The pressure to explain intentions, justify emotions, or narrate personal progress diminishes. Silence becomes communicative rather than awkward. Routine gains importance over novelty. Even leisure feels structured, unfolding in familiar settings with familiar rhythms. There is comfort in repetition, in knowing what will happen next, and in trusting that systems, though imperfect, will continue to function as they always have. This cultural environment subtly influences mindset. Emotional regulation becomes a skill rather than a constraint. Reactions soften. Observations sharpen. The emphasis shifts from standing out to fitting in without friction. Over time, many Americans notice changes in how they listen, how they speak, and how much they choose to reveal. Expression becomes more selective. Words carry more weight because fewer are used. The UK does not demand transformation, but it encourages adaptation. It offers no dramatic narrative of reinvention, no promise of sudden personal expansion. Instead, it presents continuity. Life feels less like a project and more like a process. Progress is measured quietly, often invisibly, through consistency rather than acceleration. In this way, the shock is not about difference alone, but about contrast in values. One culture prioritizes momentum, clarity, and openness. The other prioritizes balance, restraint, and endurance. Neither is superior, but the transition between them can feel disorienting. For many Americans, the UK becomes a mirror that reflects not what is missing, but what was once taken for granted. And in that reflection, a slower, quieter understanding of daily life begins to take shape.